Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, Binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
We've been meaning to get around to doing this episode for a while, and we're finally doing it, Steph.
We must have really procrastinated. This episode is about procrastination.
Exactly. And I don't know why I said exactly.
Exactly.
That was a weird response. Exactly that. You are correct, Stefanie. I looked at the definition of procrastination and I found it really unsatisfying.
Oh, I haven't read it, so could you read it?
I can. It's very short. It's just the action of delaying or postponing something.
Do you not like it because there's no story with it?
Yeah, because I think I assumed that for me, procrastination always has so much judgment around it not being a positive thing. And so I was expecting that to somehow be reflected in the definition of the word. And the definition is really neutral.
Yes.
Really neutral. So are we here to neutralize procrastination?
I don't think of it as bad all the time. I used to, but I don't anymore because I've read about it that it can be really helpful. Some people, it's not for everybody, but some people can gear up this way and they actually produce more. Their systems get enough energy from the condensed period of time with which they then have to do the task to motivate. Like, it's good for your motivation and it kind of gets your system going. Whereas taking your time might be, you might have less oomph.
Well, the first time I became aware of that concept was while I was studying for my master's in psychotherapy. And it was the essays that we had to do. And I was always telling myself, right, this month, I'm going to start my essay really early and get it done in loads of time. And invariably, I was doing it in the last week. And for the longest time, I was just trying to promise myself that each time I'd get the essay done sooner. And then I don't know if it was a concept I heard somewhere. I think it might have even been my dad who said it. But I realized, based on something I heard somewhere, that actually, quite often, by the time I came to sit down and write my essay, I was ready to write it, because even though I was procrastinating and I hadn't done much, the essay was on my mind and the topic of the essay was on my mind as well. So it wasn't this planning or thinking through, right, I'll cover that and I'll cover that. But there was something about holding it in my mind that time that I think something was happening, and then I was ready to write. And also that little bit of stress that kicks in as the deadline gets closer was the motivation I needed as well. And I've become a lot more comfortable and accepting of I'm somebody who's going to get a bit closer to the deadline because I need that little boost, that little bit of stress, and pressure to get me going.
It makes me more focused. So the other week, I had an idea for my Wednesday weekly email. So on a Saturday, I started to write it because I was just sitting there and I was like, oh, it's just coming out. And I was like, oh, I could get it done today. And then it's done for next week. The second I had the thought, I stopped writing and did not write it again until Wednesday morning. I didn't return to it because I think my system prefers to have a little heat. You know, it works best that way. I think my brain thinks best that way. And just seems to be how I run. I respect, though, that sometimes that might not be the case. And it might actually create more of an anxiety in people. And maybe it's both. Like the anxiety might be on top of maybe a system that would run okay that way if we didn't have the judgment around it, maybe. Or for other reasons that it may not be felt as safe to be waiting that long. And then we're creating more angst for ourselves. And that's where I think that procrastination more has that negative story connotation. But I don't think that's as true for everyone. And it can be helpful in some cases. But where does this intersect with food? I do know.
It was so direct, that question. I was just like, where does it intersect with food? So I've got a post that I don't tell anybody, Steph, but I sometimes have posted the same post twice on Instagram. Yeah, there's a post I posted twice about binge eating and being unproductive or feeling unproductive. And it's one that people often really relate to. And I can really relate to that as well. If I'd had a day where I felt really on it and really productive and I got a lot done, even by the end of the day, even if I hadn't eaten enough, I wouldn't necessarily feel the urge to binge because I was kind of riding this high on like, look how amazing and productive I am. But put me in another day where, and this was the worst day for me, was if I had planned to be productive and then I wasn't, more so than if I hadn't had any plans. That sense of like, these things that I think I ought to be doing and I'm not, I'm pushing them back and pushing them back, my energy would sink and I would feel heavier at the end of the day. And I think I'd be using food, I think, to make myself feel better about that as well.
That's one I wasn't thinking about. I was thinking about using food to procrastinate.
Yeah, that one too. Go for it. Off you go.
I think that's even still compelling because there was an article that I used to have to write every month. I say have to. I volunteered to, and I would always get a bit of, I don't know what to write about. Like I would worry about how it was going to come out. And so I would catch myself, I'll just have a snack first. I'll just go have it, And I remember doing that so much in college and in my 20s where there was something I had to do and I would binge instead. Sometimes I think that had to do with, actually, sometimes it would get me out of it. So if it was something I had a choice in doing, so for example, exercise, I didn't really want to. So I would be like, I'll do it later. Okay, I'll do it later. And then I would end up binging and then I wouldn't do it. And I kind of think there was a way that I got out of it. It was like I didn't want to do it in the first place. So I just procrastinated long enough that I could sabotage the whole thing. Or if it was something that I did have to do, the binge became almost like that nervous energy response of like I know the more anxiety that was building about the fact that I wasn't doing it, it was coming and it was looming, that sort of hanging over my head type of feeling. I would use food. I don't know if it was to numb it out, to distract from it, or I guess so. I guess it would be a way that I would cover it up. When I think about it now, I suppose if I could go back and talk to my former self, there was a lot of resistance in me at that time. For most of my life, there was a lot of resistance. And it was just this idea that I never gave myself the option of being like, yeah, I just don't want to do it. Or, yeah, it sucks, and to validate that. Cause I always felt so wrong for not wanting to do something, especially if I'd signed up for it. I had a lot of judgment about it. So the story that I would be attaching to everything, I think part of me was looking to get away from the story as well, because it was just so much. It would compound. It wasn't the task. It was the task and what it meant about me and why didn't I want to and I have to, and the pressure that felt like. There was so much in that food was just like, oh, just eat. Yeah.
You stopped really suddenly then. It was like the steam just went out of what you were saying. But I can agree. There's something about eating that seems like a really legitimate delay tactic. So that's one of the things it says in the definition, is that it talks about delay tactics as being part of procrastination. And I think as well, if you've got a voice in your head there's a lot of shoulds, there's a lot of criticisms, there's a lot of pressure about what it is you should be doing. And yet food can be a way of creating just a little bit of silence and a little bit of distraction from that voice in your head that's telling you you've got to be doing this, that, and the other. If that's the only way you can get a respite from that mental pressure, then food's going to become even more necessary in those moments, the more pressure you're putting on yourself to do this thing, whatever it might be.
Yeah, it also feels like you're doing something.
Yeah.
Like what you get up, you have to get it. You gotta, you're like, it's active. So it feels like, oh no, I'm doing this. I mean, like, I don't think of, thinking that, but it feels active as opposed to passive. And that can feel better. I am doing something, or I'm going to just do this first, I don't know if that's enough though, to combat it. Like, do you think that having this awareness is helpful? Is it helpful from a behavior perspective? Does it actually change the use of food? Does it matter if we know?
Well, it's always helpful for us to understand, because then we can ask that very question, because in some situations it might create enough space to be like, oh, okay, I see what I'm doing here. That makes a bit more sense. If I do these other things to give myself a bit more space, maybe. And in other situations, it may feel bigger than that. And the knowledge of why you might be doing it might not be enough necessarily to combat it. I think for me, there's something about the battling with ourselves. So much of what we talk about around this just takes me back to this concept of conflict, being in conflict with ourselves. Part of us is thinking we need to do the thing. Part of us is resisting the idea of doing the thing.
Right.
Now we're in this really kind of tense, agitated, we don't know what to do with ourselves moment. And that's even harder to take action forward, like momentum forward, when we are losing energy almost by battling with ourselves over the thing. And then how many times, certainly for me anyway, I do the thing and I'm like, I feel so much better for doing the thing. The thing was actually fine. Maybe I even enjoyed doing the thing when I started doing the thing.
Every time.
So much of it is this psychological resistance sometimes to things that kind of need to be done or would be beneficial for us to get done.
So that's what I meant when I was talking about the resistance, like that internal battle being partly the problem. But why do we procrastinate then? What are the reasons that we do? And how is, because by all of this logic, it seems like every time I wrote that article every month for 2 years, I wrote it and I was like, that was fine. And and the next time it was always this thing that I procrastinated. I couldn't carry it over. So why do we?
Well, yours there sounded like perfectionism because you were worried about how it was going to turn out and you're putting that pressure on it being a certain quality.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is more likely to be if I don't already know how to do something. So I have been procrastinating over sorting something out with my accounts regarding my VAT. And I know it wasn't going to be a big job, but I procrastinated for a few months, potentially costing myself money because I hadn't sorted it out because I didn't know how to do the thing. It's like if my dad cooks something, and oh, this is great. And he'll go, it's really simple. And then he starts telling me how to do it. And it might be really simple, but there's part of me that goes, I don't know how to do this. And this came up because you said it about the soup recipe I gave you. And I really
made it again.
Related to it. I really related to it.
I made it again. It was such a hit, by the way. When did I say that? Because I don't remember saying it to you.
You said something in the message about.
Yeah, in your message I sent you. Yeah,
right. That you hadn't done it yet because you were, maybe it was when we spoke. You said you hadn't done the recipe yet because you were, I don't know if you said worried about getting it wrong or you weren't quite sure if you were going to be able to do it. There was something, I mean, can you remember?
Because when I see a recipe, it overwhelms me. So I don't know that I've got it in my head. I can't see it done. So I need to do it before it feels like I can do it. But then I did it and it was so easy. And then I did it again because it was so easy. And I was so pleased with myself because now I feel like I'm going to make it all the time. But yeah, it's like I knew if I looked at the recipe, I'd be able to do it. But there's something about like, oh, I don't know. I don't have a clear picture of it at first. So that makes it seem that makes me want to move away. Because I don't know what the details are. There's something in that.
Yeah, it's the same with my VAT. I knew all I had to do was Google it and follow a few instructions. I knew I'd be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I couldn't really imagine what that was going to look like yet.
What is this? Because I think this is a big part of procrastination for a lot of people.
Is there something, perhaps part of it, I don't think it's the whole thing, but is there a theme in here about the willingness to make mistakes and be messy and get it wrong? What is our relationship to making mistakes or not getting it right? Something for me maybe around confusion. I hate being confused. That was one of my biggest binge triggers, was I'm confused about what to eat. So I might binge because I don't know what to eat. So it almost feels like that same attitude that can come out. I'm confused. I don't know this thing, so I might as well not do it.
So that's interesting. I relate to confusion as a trigger, but not for the same reason. So I'm not afraid to make a mistake, but it's overwhelming that I have to go through the amount of steps I have to go through to figure it out. Like in relationship to the conversation we had about HSPs, one of the factors was I get frazzled when there's too many steps or too many things to do in a short amount of time. So to me, if doing the job means I first have to orient myself to the job, that's a whole nother step, multiple steps, besides actually executing. To me, that's very overwhelming. And I think there's something about like, if I'm confused about something, it means I'm going to have to figure out how to figure it out, then go figure it out, then do it. And all the myriad, little subtleties of all that. So to me, it is about the overwhelm of that.
When you're speaking now, I'm thinking, I don't feel like it is about making a mistake. I feel like I want to backtrack on that because when you sort of said it back to me, I was like, it doesn't feel resonant to me. For me, it's an anticipation, maybe an anticipation of pain of some kind.
Yeah.
Because particularly when it comes to sorting out technological things, to do with my website, ways in which my brain doesn't work very comfortably with that kind of step-by-step thinking. There's a stress response, and I think I'm trying
Yes.
to avoid that stress. But in the
Yeah.
avoidance of the stress, the
You're
irony is
creating
I'm
more.
creating more of it.
Again, it's one of those things that logic doesn't. Of course, you know you can do it, and that it's not going to be, painful. You can always stop, but there's this feeling of. I suppose in this for procrastination, CBT might be very helpful to be able to work through this and deconstruct it this way. And it is a step by step, when we take it one step at a time and say, okay, that's manageable. It's less overwhelming. But there's also this sense of that overwhelming, like that sense is something separate than the logic of the sense. It's very compelling.
The VAT thing, how I ended up actually managing to do it was I had a friend over for lunch, and she's a New Yorker, straight talking, blunt. There's no fluff about her at all.
Uh-huh.
And I'm telling her about it, and she's kind of saying to me, what's wrong with you? just do it. A little bit, only slightly nicer than that. And as I'm talking it through with her and I'm trying to explain it to her, she's not quite getting it, but there was something in the verbalization of saying this that felt really helpful. And as I'm talking to her, I'm starting to think, yeah, actually, like, this is not a big deal. Why am I making it a big deal? So when she left and I was in that space, I did it the moment she left. And I said to her when she was leaving, I said to her, I'm going to do it now. And she was like, great, do it now. So one, the accountability part was a little bit better. And also there was something around noticing, in this moment, I feel like it's possible. So I need to grab this moment and use this moment to do it.
Well, that's the orienting of the activity. In telling her about it, you're actually outlining the steps and they're becoming less abstract in your mind. I think that abstraction in the mind of what something entails is part of, for me, it's overwhelm. That's what overwhelms me. So there's something to be said of orienting to the task first by visualizing it or writing out the steps or thinking through the steps that maybe we don't do as a practice, but maybe that to me, that's why outlines are super helpful. When I think about writing a book, I'm like, like freeze, or writing an article even sometimes. But when I make an outline for the points I want to make, oh gosh, it comes out so much easier. And I think that's to do with figuring out something first, like understanding what you're talking about, what you're about to do, what the steps include, naming them so that your brain's like, oh, okay, I can be familiar with that. Okay. And then there's like a safety to move on from that point.
I hate outlines. Like, I want to be able to do them. I see the benefit of an outline, but for me, I feel like I just put myself in a cage the minute I do an outline.
Oh, to me, it's so organizing. It's like, I don't have to do the writing. I just have to do the outline. That's like, I get it. I feel like I'm getting out, like I'm cheating the system. I just have to write my ideas down. Later, I'll fill them in. The filling them in is the hard part. It's not, though, when you have an outline. Does procrastination ever come into play with body image? Because it's reminding me of with clothes, it does.
Procrastination and clothes. What do you mean?
Yes. Because I've described this on the podcast before. Getting dressed is such again, it's that, like, I don't know what I'm going to wear. I don't know how I'm going to feel when I put it on. I don't even quite know how to put enough if you're not adept in, like, I lost my fashion sense. So it was kind of like, I don't know. The whole thing is so overwhelming to me. And the idea of at one time, facing the pain of how it looked or how it felt on me. So I would wait until the very, very, very last minute to get dressed for something or to buy something to wear if I had, or like figuring out what I was going to wear. Because I was trying to avoid this. And again, it was one of those things where if I actually thought about it and if I did it in advance, it wasn't so bad. But the idea of it was so overwhelming, of all those steps and all the predictions of pain, that I would just not and end up creating more stress for myself because it was like time to go. And I was like, I'm still in like a freeze.
I think if I was predicting pain around clothing back then, I might have done something similar, but I think I've always kept it so I just not ever given a lot of thought to clothes.
Well, maybe that's part of the perfectionism too. Like I never gave myself the option of just good enough. It was like I had to look good enough.
I think when I was in my recovery or trying to recover from binge eating, I felt like I was procrastinating at recovery. All these things that I was saying I was going to be doing or should be focusing on, it was always like later. I mean, the amount of times it could be anything from, I don't know, I would read something about mindfulness and meditation. I'd be like, right, I'm going to do that every single day. And then starting and stopping. And I just felt like I was always telling myself I was going to do something, always starting to do something and then stopping doing something. So it felt like life was this one long procrastination in a very sort of non-specific way, just a sense of never getting around to doing any of the things that I was saying I was going to be doing.
Sometimes, but here's the thing. So I think there's two camps, right? So there's things in life that we procrastinate that we really could be doing. But then there's things we procrastinate because we think we should be doing them. But there are reasons to not. Like I, for a long time, wanted to meditate. And I'd be like, okay, when my kids will go to school, when I when COVID's over, and really I had to kind of unresist or like deconstruct the resistance around the fact that like right now, my life is just in a place where adding a new task and trying to make that a habit is really hard. And so it's not going to be a goal right now. And that has freed my soul. You know what I mean? And probably is more likely to get me to meditate sometimes. What's the difference between tasks we procrastinate that we really, maybe there's a reason, you know what I mean? Maybe there's merit to the procrastination versus ones that were and what would be the reason for the ones that actually could be taking place? Like, why are we, I just think it's helpful to separate tasks that we think we should be doing from ones we actually should be doing.
That's the kind of question that I could have tied myself up in knots with trying to think about the reasons. And I would always come back to, but this would help me so much. So if something's going to help me, then I should do it. Like that would have been my thinking at the time. And I think I've shared this on a previous episode, but during COVID, I did fall out of my habit of meditation and kept trying to get back into it with this whole, like, I need to. I wasn't using the word should, but I was using the word need, which is basically kind of another kind of should in the way it's used often. I really need to meditate again tonight. I really need to, and not wanting to. Now, I could have gone back and forth with the reasons and just gone, well, I don't have to, so let's just throw this out the window. But that didn't feel right either. So I felt stuck. So I came to the place of going, okay, I could meditate. I get to medicate. I was actually. I get to meditate. Now, do I want to? And that was how I was phrased. I just changed the language in my mind. I get to do this thing because inside I knew how I'd felt previously when I was doing it. So for me to have just let go and go, no, I'm just not going to do this anymore. That didn't feel okay for me either. Like even in terms of like the part of me that's going, this is so beneficial, but I had to pull the pressure back. So it was this sort of really nuanced balance that my all or nothing thinking could never have done a few years ago. That kind of went, okay, I get to do this thing that I know helps. Do I want to? Is today the day? But holding it in that lighter way.
Was the only reason that you weren't doing it because you thought you should? Like, why weren't you doing it then?
So the reason why I'd stopped doing it was I used to do my meditation just before I went to sleep. And then I would take my growth hormone injection and then I would go to sleep. If I don't fall asleep within 30 minutes of taking my growth hormone injection, I could be awake for up to 2 hours because it has a slightly stimulating effect. So it's like I have this 30-minute window to fall asleep.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure.
Oh, well, I have to be really careful. I was just about to say I have to be really careful not to put the pressure on myself. So what was happening during COVID was, especially this was the first couple of months of COVID where we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know if walking past somebody or being within 30 meters of them outside is going to give you this disease that we still don't understand what it is yet. So there was this real like unease, everything shut down. So it was harder to sleep. So rather than meditating, I turned to ASMR at bedtime instead. And that was the only thing that was working for me. Meditation wasn't working for me at that time in terms of really calming myself down and making myself sleepy enough to sleep. So that's why I came out of it, because it just wasn't serving me at that time.
Okay.
Then, of course, as the months go by and things are kind of falling into a rhythm, trying to put that habit back in there was this.
But why did you know that you should or feel that you should?
Because I knew how beneficial it was before, and I felt like I was missing that.
So what made it hard to just do it?
I don't know, because of the pressure that I was putting on myself.
Okay. So it was part of the should. Okay.
I think so. It was this whole like, oh, I need to do this thing. I know it's going to benefit. It's like saying, I need to fall asleep within half an hour, otherwise I'm going to be awake all night.
Okay.
You put that pressure on yourself, and it's going to be harder to do it.
So another example of how procrastination can be, like the should about something is actually more to the point. Like addressing that is more to the point.
Yes. Yeah. And
so that might be a way of differentiating between something that is.
That might be a way.
Oh, sorry.
No, I spoke over. Go.
You know, sometimes I like in podcasts when people speak over each other. I wanted to tell you that.
I it a bit, but sometimes it's.
Okay. Anyway, I don't remember what I was saying.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It was probably nothing.
No, it was probably gold. I think that's confusing when the thing you're procrastinating over, would be really good for you. So recognizing that sometimes just the act of putting pressure on yourself, even though the thing itself might be beneficial, could be part of what's causing that procrastination.
That's it. That's what I mean. What are other reasons? What are other reasons why we procrastinate? Oh, we've cited some: overwhelm or fear of pain. Shoulds. Go ahead.
I want to throw in tiredness.
Yeah.
Like, are we getting enough rest? I appreciate not everyone's lives is set up that they can get enough rest. But sometimes it can be the body and mind's way of saying, no, we want to rest. We don't want to be pushing. We don't want to be doing this thing that you're trying to make us do.
So what about for people, though, who are like, oh, all I do is lay around and do nothing? I just want to read a post to you.
Mm-hmm. Is it one of yours?
It's not one of mine. This is not a post of mine, but it's one that I reposted. It's from Natalie of Need to Talk. Here's a warning, everybody. I'm about to say a word that is not child-friendly. I'm going to give you some time. Okay. And I quote, "If you're being a dick to yourself about resting while you're resting, you're not actually resting. You're mostly just being a dick to yourself." I think, because I used to do this, I used to be like, all I do is freaking sleep and eat. That's all I do. What right do I have to like not want to do something active? But all I was really doing all of the time that I was sleeping and eating was expending so much energy resisting myself and hating myself. This is not resting. So when we talk about resting or restoration, taking a break, I think we have to be mindful of the true meaning of that, of doing that, and not what it looks like. So just because you maybe don't do things, quote unquote, doesn't mean that you are actually giving your body the rest and your mind the restoration that it's actually looking for, which can then, I think this can be very confusing because it confused me. I could not understand why I had no energy to do anything, but really all the time I was constantly just like using that energy to hate myself all the time.
Don't they say it's something like 25% of the body's energy gets used by the brain? And it comes back to that. I'm telling you, Steph, everything comes back to this inner conflict thing.
I know, a lot of it does.
Of you, when you're fighting it out with yourself, it is absolutely exhausting. It's draining. And that was why giving myself that permission, for example, with the meditation, is saying, like, I get to, do I want to? That removed the conflict, which actually freed up energy and freedom for me to feel like I could actually make a decision. And then I wanted to. It wasn't just like, okay, now I can make myself do it. No, I realized then that I wanted to. And sometimes we can get in our way, even with things that we want to do, we can procrastinate over things we want to do. We've talked a bit here about things that might feel a little bit more like chores or things we think we should do. But procrastinating over the good stuff as well happens when we get in a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that's just popped into my head when I was saying that was worthiness. That we're talking about procrastinating over things that might be good for us.
Yeah.
Something about deserving. Occasionally somebody will reach out to me about wanting to work together, and there's this whole story around whether they deserve help, and part of that has been what stopped them from reaching out for help, because I'm not bad enough. I don't deserve it.
Yes, that's not something that we would deconstruct in a procrastination model. I feel like that's kind of like, then there's something more going, you know what I mean? That's not an issue with procrastination. That's an issue with self-worth.
Yeah, but it could show up in procrastination. So
yes,
somebody who's been meaning to reach out, It sounds like I'm just trying to sell our services here, doesn't it, a bit? If you're somebody who's been meaning to join our podcast community, but you've been wondering, maybe it's something about belonging and taking risks as well. Yeah, and you're procrastinating over coming and joining us. Details in the show notes. That's where I'm thinking it could, when it comes along to something that you are intending to do, but you're delaying it, but you don't know why you're delaying it necessarily consciously, but it could be around a sense of
yes,
feel like you deserve it. If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode. Right. And that's what I mean to say is that we might be calling that like, why am I not doing this thing? And focusing on why do I procrastinate or why don't I get things done? And it might actually be more of an issue of why don't I believe that I'm worth doing that? Mm-hmm. Great point.
I've got one of my therapist friends and I, we both joke about procrastination quite a lot, particularly around financial stuff that both of us are quite bad with procrastination with. And we have this running thing between us that actually, if you bury your head in the sand long enough, the problem just resolves itself. If you just ignore your problems, they go away. And occasionally you ignore something and it does sort itself.
Yeah, occasionally.
we'll always send each other a voice note to go, see, we need to come back. This is the philosophy that we need. But I wonder if that occasionally there's that going on, this idea of if I don't face this thing, maybe it will all get resolved. Maybe somebody else will come in and step in and do something. Could be a type of learned helplessness, perhaps.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've procrastinated having conversations with people because it will be confrontational. That if I just let enough time go by, everybody forgets about it. Yeah. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I didn't rush to act on that one. Yeah. Sometimes procrastination, and so what I'm saying, it's not always bad to delay, or what was the other definition? It's a neutral thing. It's just about the context in which it lives.
Well, it also said in the definition similar to dithering, which sounds a little bit more judgmental.
Yeah.
Dithering, it just kind of suggests you don't know which way is up, or,
you're just a bumbling butt.
Looking here on Google, we've been trying to come up with reasons why people procrastinate, and it's been done for us. So there are 6 different types of procrastinators. They are perfectionist, right there, dreamer, worrier, defier, crisis maker, and overdoer.
Yeah, that feels true. I think it's so helpful to look at it this way, because you're getting to the root of the issue. Like if perfectionism or overdoing, if you're someone who overdoes something, then of course you're going to procrastinate because there's so much to do. You know what I mean? It makes so much sense. And then I just think that's a great list to like post on your fridge if this is an issue for you, because it helps highlight what's actually going on, rather than thinking I just like to blanket it like I just procrastinate. I just can't get things done. I'm self-sabotaging,
So I don't want to, because there's 6 of these, I don't want to get into them in too much depth. But I guess the point is, if you're looking at these 6, and maybe we'll post a link to this article, the podcast. If you're the perfectionistic procrastinator, it's like, the question to ask is this perfectionism that's holding me back? Am I someone who has to put in excessive amounts of time and energy to make sure it's all perfect? If so, you're more likely to want to procrastinate. The dreamer procrastinator, they tend to recoil from anything that could be difficult or distressing. Tends to be passive rather than active. See, this one sounds like me, Steph. This is the dreamer procrastinator.
You're the dreamer?
Yeah, I'm the dreamer. And then the worrier procrastinator, they tend to be indecisive. So it's a lot harder to make the decisions. They lack confidence in their own abilities. So that makes them more likely to delay doing something. And the defier procrastinator, that's the rebellion one, who tends to see life in terms of what others expect or require them to do. So I can find the defier in me, even when I'm defying myself, my own expectations and my own pressures.
Yeah.
The crisis maker, when faced with an undesirable task, they tend to dramatize situations. They tend to be easily bored. So there's a kind of sense of everything, like it's a difficulty in doing dull tasks because it's more of a, I suppose, a stimulating, seeking type. And then the last one is the overdoer procrastinator. And that tends to come from the low self-esteem place, which compels them to take on more work than they can handle. They have trouble saying no or asking for help. And interestingly here, they said they tend to lack true self-discipline in regard to their personal needs. And they find it really difficult to relax without feeling guilty or ashamed. That is so good. Maybe I'll just copy and paste that at the beginning of the episode. I mean, the rest of the episode won't make a lot of sense because we won't refer back to it, but
it's good we leave it here. I mean, when you Google it, there's lots of articles on this stuff. But I think it's helpful. I think it's just diving deeper into yourself. And again, the benefit of that is figuring out, okay, like I can have compassion for myself because I can see that this is all what's going on. And that makes sense, and addressing issues of perfectionism or what have you. Even as I look through some of the articles, here's what to do if you're this type of procrastinator, and I think everyone writes the article from their own lens. And I don't think there's like a right answer, you know what I mean? Because as I'm reading some of them, I'm like, no, that really wouldn't help me though.
I was going to say, listen to this one. So do you want to hear the strategy for the perfectionistic procrastinator, Steph?
Yeah.
Avoid all or nothing thinking.
Yeah, it's like, oh, again, thanks, Mike. You have to listen to last week's episode to get that one.
That'll have to be our thing now. Poor Mike. Every time we say like the bleeding
Captain Obvious.
We're like, yeah, cheers, Mike.
Oh, you know what else they talk about?
Go on.
Talks about foods that help with procrastination. Can you believe that? The idea is that it's
Can I guess? Is it omega-3s by any chance?
Not in this one.
Oh, so that's the brain superfood. Probably
that's true.
Like,
that's true.
So 2019 or something.
They're talking about it from the lens of stress. So that stress is a major player in procrastination, which I would agree with. And so the idea is that proteins and nutrition, basically having a nutritional approach to fighting stress.
So really, I just needed to eat more chicken breast if I wanted to start meditating again. Is that right?
See, it was that simple.
Food can just fix everything.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I guess what we're encouraging people to do is approach it from a place of, rather than beating yourself up for procrastinating, is to investigate what might be going on and trusting that there are reasons there. Because when you're in it, it just feels like you're just not doing the thing you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. There is so much underlying everything we do or don't do. And if we get more curious about that, we might be able to figure some of this stuff out and be able to make some steps forward without it being a painful process.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well,
we're going to wrap this episode up now because we're going to go and chat to Sinead now from Intuitive Eating Ireland.
Hint.
Because in September, Steph and I are coming to Ireland. So our Irish listeners, drop us a message so we can let you know more about that. Or anyone who wants to travel to Ireland. We're going to be doing an event with Intuitive Eating Ireland in Dublin, second weekend in September. We will tell you more about it nearer the time. But
we're also going to be in New York in May. So if anyone has been looking to travel and have a reason to go visit a new land, consider coming with us.
Come to us in New York.
Come away with us. What is that from? Do you know that?
No.
Come away with us. It's from The Sound of Music. You'll never be one of them. Lieutenant, they're here. It's when he catches. I know that movie by heart.
I've watched that film many times and I don't. Maybe I just
it's when Rolf. It's when Rolf. When he's like, "Come away with us." Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
procrastinating the ending.
Yeah, but also if you want to come to our events, you have to have rated the show. That's like if you have to have left us a review and a rating. Otherwise, and those of you that are listening on platforms that you can't rate and review, sorry, no ticket fee. Alrighty then.
She's kidding. Okay. I felt like to clarify that because somebody's taking you seriously.
No, people have been listening long enough to want to come and meet.
We know that's not true, Sarah. Think about it.
Think about what? If people have been listening, what?
But think about people that don't necessarily listen.
Those aren't going to be the people who are going to come and see us, though. So there's
That's true.
going to be people who've been listening for a while that are going to want to give up their time to come and visit us, hang out with
fine.
us.
Yeah, the people who, okay, fine. They have an invested interest in us already, or a vested interest. Okay, we have to go.
You do.
We'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.